Hello and welcome to Frontrunner Motorsport and another members only video, the final one of 2024. We have previously looked at classic liveries from the BTCC in 1993, the 2001 24 Hours of Le Mans, International F3000 1985 and the first season of Formula E. But for the first time we are going to be looking at some classic liveries of Formula 1. I've done livery reviews of every Formula 1 season since I started the channel, all the way back to 2020. We're not going too far into the distant past, only back to 2010, because that was the last time Formula 1 had a really full grid. This was the year Team Lotus, HRT and Virgin Racing joined the grid, and all would be gone after 2014. Only Haas have joined the grid since. We'll come back to Formula 1 at some point in the future, I'm sure, because there are liveries from the 90s I really want to talk about. But for now, let's take a look at the classic Formula 1 liveries from 2010. Thank you for being a member and supporting the channel. Let's jump into the video. HRT, not hormone replacement therapy, the Hispania racing team which couldn't even decide on what name to use or what drivers to have, let alone what livery to stick with. The chaotic start to life and a lack of funds meant the short-lived Spanish team had other priorities than tarting up their car extra nice. And the mostly black car does look very lower league. I do like the Spanish colours in the stripes along the side, but there are far too many sponsor logos slapped around, a sign I know of their financial struggles. But it does make the car very ugly to look at. I don't like the driver's first name on the side of the car in a really plain white font. I don't understand the point. It doesn't help identify the driver, because you can't really see it in motion, and the cars were usually last, so it didn't really matter anyway. Of all the new teams that came in 2010, HRT were the worst on the track, and they had the worst livery. It's an F. Virgin Racing. My least favourite combination of colours on a race car is red, white and black. That is a problem that has plagued Formula E for a long time. Interestingly enough, when Virgin entered Formula E, they came in with the iconic silver and purple colours. Why didn't they start that here with this car? Well, I guess Virgin is associated with red. Read into that what you will. It's neater than the HRT and looks more like a competitive race car, but it's nothing exciting to look at. I will give it some credit for being on the better end of red, white and black liveries, but it's not one I am all that fond of. So it's a D. Team Lotus. This is more like it. Might be kind of a dick move to steal a classic much-loved team's identity for your completely new and unrelated outfit, but it definitely gets you some attention. And to be honest, almost everyone has had a go at the Lotus livery here and there. The Tony Fernandez-led Team Lotus came in classic British racing green with yellow stripes, synonymous with Lotuses of bygone age, making you think of Jim Clark and Graham Hill, all whilst a very old Jarno Trulli and a very disheartened Heikki Kovalainen were driving. I like it because it's ballsy in the first place, but I love the classic green with yellow stripes. It's a more modern take on the classic rather than just a blatant rip-off. It's a B for Lotus, even if the performances were an F. Toro Rosso. Remember when RB had a proper name like Toro Rosso? Italian for Red Bull. Okay, so they were never that original, and their liveries never were either. It's Red Bull, but Red Bull Cola. Does Red Bull Cola still exist? I do like it more than the Red Bull livery we've seen every year for the last 20 years. The colours are more interesting, the darker blue, the colours of the charging ball on the airbox and the golden nose. It all fits together so much better than the dreary Red Bull livery we'll get to see later in this list and inevitably in 2025. But as for the Toro Rosso of 2010, let's give it a B. I do like it a lot more than the current RB livery anyway. BMW Sauber. The final year that Sauber were known as BMW Sauber, and with absolutely no involvement or components from BMW, Peter Sauber famously brought the team back from BMW in December and didn't have time to apply for a name change. So the BMW-less BMW Sauber was going its own way after 5 years with BMW. No longer with sponsorship from Petronas or Red Bull, as they were busy elsewhere on the grid. The Sauber team of 2010 was starting from scratch, so they didn't bother painting the car. There just isn't a livery here except for a random Burger King sticker and a Sauber logo slapped on with all the care you'd expect from a last minute salvage job. I'd give them a break but they kept it this way for the next 5 years. So it's an F. Force India. I always liked the Force India livery. The pride of racing in the national colours of the country the money is coming from works when it is a distinct and interesting flag. That being said, the 2010 version of this livery might be the worst. It's plainer with more white than the 2009 version, and later on it'll be mixed up with black as well, and that was a great looking car. When I say this is the worst Force India livery, it's still a good livery, and one that always stood out on the Formula 1 grid, so it's a B for Force India. Williams. Definitely not the most interesting livery ever, but it is a very smart looking livery. The nicest thing I can say about it, it's tidy. But of all the Williams liveries before and after this one, it just doesn't stick in my mind. That might be because Williams were long past their best years and weren't exactly being very memorable themselves. But navy blue with white trim and white sponsor logos, Phillips hanging off the back like the terms and services for a product you'll only use once. It's a neat if dull livery, so that's a D. Renault. I loved the pale blue and yellow Renault of their golden period. I absolutely hated the orange Crashgate car that followed, and then they showed up in 2010 with the Bumblebee Renault. It's a perfect 10 out of 10. Well, the black parts of the car are pretty much random. The little black bars along the bottom of the sides around the sponsor's logo is a bit odd if singled out. And it is absolutely covered in sponsor logos. A little more restraint or thoughtful placement would have made this better when taken out of the context of the whole. These odd things make it a strange livery, but as a whole, it's a great livery. I don't know what they were going for, but for me, it will always be the Bumblebee livery, and it's an A-grade livery. Superb job from Renault. Nowadays, I just wish they'd choose a livery and stick with it all year. Mercedes. This was the year Mercedes returned to the Formula 1 grid after taking over 2009 champions Brawn. They also brought back the 7-time champion Michael Schumacher. A move that never really worked out, but Mercedes would be the team to dominate the sport for nearly a decade. I have always hated the Mercedes livery. I never realised how close to the McLaren it was in 2010. A dull, boring grey. What is it with German manufacturers and grey liveries? No one likes grey. We equate grey with misery. You can win all you want, but your liveries are miserable. F for making me sad. Ferrari. Shock of shocks, they were red. They were red in 1950. They were red in 2010, and they'll be red in 2025. I do like this version of the Ferrari livery, a nice shade of red with white trim on the wings. Sponsors are neatly applied, and in the case of the shell logo, match the branding of the Ferrari. It's all very well put together, so I'll give this particular Ferrari livery an A. McLaren. I was so happy when McLaren moved on from the silver livery to the papaya orange. It was such a refreshing change, but given how bad the orange livery has got in the last couple of years, I find myself kind of missing the old silver McLarens. Unless they do their modern cars silver, then they cock that up as well. By 2010, it was a very tired livery, moving to grey instead of the chrome of the late 90s and early 2000s. It did make the Vodafone trim stand out, and that is a much brighter shade of red than I remember. It kind of pops, so I'll give this a C, mostly because I thought I'd like it less than I do. Red Bull. Yeah, this livery was starting to get old in 2010. The fact it has changed very little 15 years later is almost depressing. I do like this more than the matte look of the more recent Red Bulls, but it looks a lot more cartoony than I remember. I think it's the yellow on the airbox. This is the car they would dominate Formula 1 with for the next 4 years, and there is just something off about this livery. Maybe it's the can on the rear wing, and I know the Toro Rosso also had a can on the back, but the normal Red Bull colours make it worse somehow. The plain Red Bull logo is worse to look at than the Toro Rosso ball. I've always disliked the Red Bull livery pretty much everywhere it turns up, and it turns up a lot. It's an F for sheer bloody-minded repetition. So they are all the liveries from the 2010 Formula 1 season. Not the best grid in the world in terms of liveries. Some good ones, but most are just very tidy but not very memorable. A few teams were having their worst phase. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, as well as what future livery reviews you members would like to see. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. Happy New Year, and have a good one.